All right, welcome to everybody. Welcome to everybody who's joining us today. My name is Alex Lebow. I'm a partner at Daversa Partners.
And my name is Brittany Rosenfeld, and I'm an associate director at Daversa Partners. And Alex and I co-lead the firm's legal practice.
Before we jump in, we just wanted to give a little bit of background on Daversa Partners, and then we'll have our guests introduce themselves and their firms. Daversa is technology's go-to executive search firm, working with investors and founders to build venture-backed and hypergrowth technology companies. We've been around for about 3 decades, serving as kind of strategic advisors and partners to founders that are looking to build out their senior leadership teams as they grow. So today we're joined by Mike Heath, who's a partner at Gunderson Dettmer. Mike and his firm represent emerging growth companies, technology incubators, venture funds. I'll let him kind of provide a longer introduction. And we're also joined by Celaena Powder, who's the VP of Legal at Seismic, which is a global SaaS company based out of San Diego, California. So I'll turn it over to you guys to do brief introductions, and then we can jump into the topics.
Great.
Yes, Celaena Powder. I head up legal and security at Seismic. Seismic is a SaaS company in the sales enablement space, which means we make software that helps your sales team sell better.
Great. And I'm Mike Heath. I'm a partner with Gunderson Dettmer. Been doing this for 15 years. Gunderson is the leading law firm in the venture and startup ecosystem. We close more transactions in the venture financing space than any firm out there. We form more venture funds than anyone out there.
So before we jump in, there is going to be a brief Q&A at the end. I just want to remind anybody watching, if you've got questions that you'd like to submit, please do it through the Q&A section. And then Nicole Daversa, who's sitting on the back end, will share them with the group. Okay, so as you guys probably saw before you joined, the general topic is kind of the evolving role of the General Counsel as a strategic partner inside of rapidly growing technology organizations. And the basic premise is that we believe the perception is beginning to shift. So while the function's always been critical, it's just now kind of getting the recognition it deserves. As like a critical and invaluable member of the senior leadership team. We've certainly seen this on our end in the form of a serious kind of increase in demand for general counsel searches. So Mike, first question's for you. You serve as outside counsel on day-to-day legal matters for founders and VCs. How have the demands changed since the beginning of your career? And what do you think has prompted some of those changes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one thing is that tech has kind of eaten the world. And so every business now kind of has a venture-backed component or could have a venture-backed component. And as a result, what you've seen is all sorts of different issues that maybe we didn't see very often. When I was a junior lawyer, for example, I was on a call yesterday where we were having a long conversation about European Union regulation of erythritol and sugar substitutes.
Can you say that 10 times fast?
Erythritol and sugar substitutes. And because this was a seed stage company looking to launch a consumer goods product in Europe, things have gone global, and products and companies now cover every stage and category you can imagine. Additionally, I think there's been much greater attention paid to our space. You've got 2 trends going on. One is deglobalization, and the second is increased focus on national security. And so, for example, CFIUS, which was not really a concern at all when I was a junior attorney, or maybe it was only a concern for a couple industries, comes up on nearly every single transaction now at this point. So I would say that the world at large is paying much more attention to this space. There's much more regulation of law that is being applied, and there's the stakes have gotten a lot higher.
Okay. And then I just want to take a step back. Celaena, do you mind, because you've obviously spent a lot of time in-house as well. Do you mind kind of talking us through your journey and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, so I, like Mike, am a venture attorney at my core, but that role has expanded pretty significantly when I was in-house. I always wanted to be a lawyer for whatever weird reason. I can't tell you if that's right or wrong anymore. But I never felt like in law school anything clicked for me.
Sure.
I always wanted straight A's, yada, yada, but it never felt like anything landed or spoke to me until I took a business school course on startups, and I put together a business plan, I pitched it, and I fell in love. And this was finally the ecosystem that I felt like this is where I was supposed to be. And so I ended up really cutting my teeth actually at Gunderson LA. And I don't know if people know this, but Mike started the Gunderson LA office as a fifth-year associate, which is crazy. And when I joined, there was Mike and one other associate. And it was the three of us in essentially a conference room in Venice, managing an office, I guess. It was the joke was it was the inmates running the asylum, but it was really cool because we were basically a well-funded startup. We were our own IT system. We would crawl into the attic to get monitors down. We were facilities. If it rained, we put a bucket under, that leaky spot. And for me, I learned so much over such a short period of time because I was learning via osmosis. Every call that came in, I got to be part of, whether or not I actually had a speaking role. Every deal that came in, I got to learn from. I got to learn client management. I got to learn the issue spotting, the risk conversations, all by being in a really close, tight-knit space. And it was an incredible experience. But after a certain point, I was really falling in love with my clients. I love the board meeting experience. I love talking the business side of things. And I also saw what life looked like as a partner. Mike made partner while I was at Gunderson. And while Mike is an incredible partner, that wasn't going to be the right journey for me. And I really was making this decision at around the same time Seismic said, hey, we need a GC. And I had done a ton of work with Seismic, a ton of backbreaking ruling deals where I was talking to them every day, all day, all the time. So I was already part of the team at a certain point. And when I said I'm ready to make my move and they said we're ready for a GC, we just changed the name on the W-2.
Cool. So it sounds like a combination of an interest in kind of the broader business versus just being directly involved with some of the legal stuff, and then maybe some Stockholm syndrome, the amount of time that you spend.
Yeah, I think that is a great summary. Yes.
Cool. Well, we're going to come back to what the life of a partner looks like. But I think, on the theme of evolution, we've probably got a couple more questions.
Yeah, so I guess we heard Mike kind of speak about how the role of legal has shifted inside of Gunderson. How has it shifted inside of companies? Have you seen an evolution in the role, in the function, in-house?
Yeah, for sure. I think breadth and depth is the constant struggle for lawyers in-house. I think, like Mike noted, you are no longer a San Diego-based company. You are a global company that's grappling with global issues, that have global customers who have different perspectives on things. And so there is this evolution of, I'm not a California barred attorney anymore. I'm a general counsel. But there's also this role of business advisor. I think maybe 2 decades ago, the GC role looked very different. It was the lawyer you brought in for a legal matter. And now GCs are really emphasizing the counseling function. The advice and counsel is much more important than a lot of that technical nitty-gritty legal work. I think there's a strategy component that's evolving. And I think business folks are starting to see when you're up against the ropes, the GC is the person you want in your corner and that you want to link arms with. And the GC can also provide some unique insights as well. We work with everyone in the business. There's not a leader I don't work with. And so I think when you become that sort of 360 view, glue that can kind of connect things together, companies are starting to realize that there's a huge value in having that person at the table.
Yeah, it's an interesting point.
I just want to ask a follow-up question. What would you say is the role of the GC in a risk management function in a startup?
Yeah, so whether we know it or not, we're always talking about risk. There's always a trade-off, and it's not just legal risk. Legal risk is a big thing, but there's reputational risk. There's financial risk, which can also be legal risk, but there's also the risk of taking a wrong step. And we are constantly talking in trade-offs. So even Mike, when we were, as outside counsel, you were often coaching companies. So if you do X, you're going to give up Y. Or, hey, you can take ABC route, but you have to understand the drawbacks. I think of risk as almost pros and cons. And I think the lawyer training is constantly thinking in pros and cons because we live in an area of gray. We don't get the benefit of testing and iterating on our work and seeing the outcome. There is no system that you put us through that says, yes, that product works, bug-free, yay. It's filled with bugs. But because we operate in the gray, I think whether we know it or not, we speak the language of risk quite well and at a level of sophistication that a lot of other business leaders don't necessarily think about.
Would you say that, that is the ability to kind of operate in the gray is accentuated when you're a company in a regulated industry? I mean, SaaS is not regulated like fintech or digital health or some other industries. Would you say that like that's just a whole different ballgame, or what is kind of comparable?
Yes and no, because sometimes if you operate in a highly regulated space, there are some pretty clear guardrails.
Mhm.
So I have a friend who is a seasoned GC at a public company.
Mhm.
And when I ask her why public company, do you really like SEC filings? The answer is, well, yes, she loves SEC filings for some reason, but she likes wielding the weapon that is the SEC. So when you have a clear regulatory framework, sometimes it might not be so gray. I mean, granted, I know Mike has a pretty big practice in crypto. And so he is representing companies that are never going to get out of gray anytime soon. But it is in the unregulated SaaS space, it is both kind of easier in that I don't have necessarily a firm book of guardrails keeping me in line, but it's a little bit harder in that you can accidentally color outside the lines with more ease.
Okay. I want to talk about crypto for a minute, Mike. A big part of your practice, right?
Well, not that big, but yes.
Okay.
Is Mike was on like he was part of it was like an inter-firm committee or working group brainstorming when I guess.
Ethereum Enterprise Alliance back in
Yes.
2017.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so take us back to 2017.
Oh, God. Okay.
And just tell us, like, I mean, 5 years in, or I'm bad at math, maybe that's 6 years in. So, I mean, what was that journey like, helping that space just take shape, specifically given the role that you play?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing I always try to say is crypto is an incredibly broad space, right? There's not one playbook or one framework you can bring to bear. If you're going to have a token, that's a very different path than, hey, we're just building infrastructure tools.
Yeah.
Hey, if you're taking fiat currency and you're going to be an on-ramp, that's a very different path than we're building smart contracts.
Sure.
And so one of the things I think that a trap for the unwary is this idea of like, oh, it's crypto, therefore these are all the resources I need to bring to bear. And that's just not the case. Back in 2017, it was really more around the token sales. And a lot of us were trying to figure out what are these things. There was a pretty influential lawyer back east who had kind of come up with this framework of, well, token issuances are securities offerings. And that became kind of, which I probably think is the right answer for most of these, right? And that became, the kind of the dominant framework at the time. At the time that the SEC hadn't really told us anything, and we, kept asking for, can you help us figure out what's going on? And so in 2017, I think it was July 2017, they announced what was called the Dow report, which if you're interested in crypto and you haven't read the Dow report, go read the Dow report. It's great. And it basically kind of stepped through the blow up of the Dow for those who are in crypto. It's why Ethereum and Ethereum Classic both exist. And it stepped through and basically applied a securities law framework to the DAO offering. Now, I think the DAO offering is a pretty obvious case of, look, that was a straight up venture fund on the blockchain. So
yeah,
pretty clear cut. But then you basically take that and you began to try to like fit again, square pegs into round holes based on what the SEC had said. Now, if you told me 6 years later we'd be sitting here and I still wouldn't have a clear framework on what is going on in these, I would have told you that's crazy. How could that happen? But yet here we are 6 years later and we're still trying to, hammer square pegs into round holes.
But I think that's also a little bit of why we love this area, not crypto necessarily. I'm not a crypto attorney, thankfully, but why we love venture and why we love startups is because we like to be on the cutting edge. We operate well within those gray areas. And I think as you become an operator of the company, you realize there's so much gray that you're operating in. And so coming from this background of not only, well, it depends, but it depends. And also there is no clear answer depending on your fact pattern. And we're going to have to figure this out. And we're going to navigate these hurdles together. I think it's a great background to come into this role.
Yeah, truly. I mean, when I was a kid, I loved to take apart a computer and like put it back together. If I like took one part out, see like how the boot error would change.
Yeah.
And, when you're dealing with a new technology, it's a little bit like that. You're trying to like figure out like, how is this thing gonna work? What tools do I need to bring to bear to like make this thing function right?
Yeah.
And if you have that kind of inquisitive mindset, I mean, it makes this job so much easier because there aren't going to be clear-cut answers necessarily on everything. And you're going to have to just kind of get comfortable being uncomfortable sometimes and trying to figure things out alongside your client.
Yeah, no, so I hear inquisitive mindset, I hear comfortability in the gray, right? I mean, these must be traits of great GCs.
I think that's right. I have somebody on my team who's been struggling a little bit with get comfortable being uncomfortable component. We had a long conversation about it, and I say that all the time. You need your for better or for worse, your stress level operates at a pretty high point, or your anxiety level operates at a pretty high point that you just get used to it over time, I think. And so after, being a ball of stress for so many years, when you start to see things that don't rise to that level of banking crisis or something,
and there it is.
Yeah,
We are all banking lawyers on this blessed day, yes.
When everything else just seems a lot easier.
Sure.
And so when you've already done something just absolutely insane, you start to get a lot more comfortable being in the, okay, well, it wasn't as bad as X.
Yeah.
Phase.
It's true in recruiting too. I mean, I pour a shot of cortisol into my double shot of espresso every single morning,
Yes.
so we get it.
Yeah.
All right, do we want to get back to the strip?
Yeah.
Well, let's ask this question. So, I mean, I want to, I heard Celaena, you talked a little bit about how, as a GC, you've kind of got your tentacles in every bit of the organization, right? How does the role evolve as a company evolves, right? And maybe Mike, you could weigh into as far as kind of this differences in the issues between seed stage companies that you work with and more mature organizations you work with.
Yeah, I think I'm a Jill of all trades and I'm a chameleon. And so I'm whatever my company needs me to be.
Mm-hmm.
On some days that can be in the weeds on some nitty-gritty customer deal or some partnership framework. And then on other days that can be big picture strategy and vision. And so I think when you're earlier in the company, that is a really tough balance. So probably most GCs at an early stage company do not have a big team.
Sure.
And so they are both doing a vision and strategy, thinking about what are the pitfalls of where this company is going, how can I help framing the company trajectory, while also having to redline contracts, which that's a really hard balance. As the company grows and as you can build out that bench, that role shifts a little bit. So when I started at Seismic, I built that team up. There were 2 contracts admins. When I first joined, Seismic sells into the global and enterprise customer base as well as financial services. So really, yeah, we sell SaaS, but what we sell is a contract.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a function that I really needed to strengthen. And I spent a lot of time in those early days building out commercial. But once I had that settled, I was able to expand my remit and really become that GC that Seismic needed and deserved, as opposed to having to focus on one specific area. So I think the role evolves in how much, I guess, tactical versus strategic work you can do over time.
Okay. And Mike, as a partner, right, on the big law side, I mean, talk to me about like context switching, right? I mean, you could field calls from pretty different clients in a row. Is that a big part of kind of what makes you successful, the ability to navigate those pivots on a dime?
I hope so, and I hope my clients would say so. Yeah, I mean, I think if I could take the question maybe
Please.
In a slightly way, when I'm talking to a founder or a team of founders at pre-seed or seed stage, right? It's very much you're advising the CEO, you're advising the board of directors directly. Well, typically they don't even necessarily know that there is a board of directors. But you're in constant contact with the business parties on a daily basis, and you're trying to explain why they may want to set a particular legal framework now because it's going to allow them to scale much faster later.
Mm-hmm.
And repeat founders kind of understand that.
Yeah.
First-time founders, sometimes it takes a little bit more explanation as to why we do things a certain
Sure.
way. But it's around things like qualified small business stock, or making your legal costs lower when you go out to raise a round later on. As you kind of continue to grow with the company, right, around the Series B, C, you'll see maybe a CFO come into the picture or a GC come into the picture. the CEO begins to kind of need to step away from legal as a function very often. And then you become a little bit more of a, hey, I just need an outsourced, lawyer to help me do things.
Yeah.
You still have that advisor function, but it tends to be a little bit more of a service provider type nature. And so the role changes, and that's fine. Some companies you get to stay close to the CEO, and I think that's really fun for me. But it is a lot of context switching, because what a Series D company needs versus a Series Seed company needs. They need great legal advice, but how that gets provided and the form of advising that takes is going to be very different.
Yeah, and honestly, the drawback analysis or the risk analysis is different. A Series Seed company might be optimizing for speed and getting stuff done a heck of a lot more than a Series D company. So Mike might give grade A advice to a Series Seed company who says, yeah, we're going to take like the C+ average test score here to proceed. I mean, the Series D company might do that as well, but you start to that advice, you start to trend towards the lawyer correct direction as the company gets bigger.
To add on to that, I had a seed stage client, good friend, who at the end of some calls, he would remind me, he'd say, Mike, I don't need it to be right. I need it to be startup right.
Yeah.
Minimum viable legal, which
Yeah.
a lot of the times the bank said.
Yeah, good enough.
Yeah, that's understandable. That makes a lot of sense.
All right, we're gonna shift gears a little bit. So Celaena, this one's for you. You obviously made the pivot in-house. Can you talk a little bit about what that pivot looked like? I'm sure it was very different on day one going in-house. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I went in-house from Gunderson, where I represented probably 70+ companies, a handful of venture funds. Like, I had a ton of experience, and I had worked really closely with Seismic. I knew all the players around the team. I knew what the products did. How many lawyers can you say understand sales enablement? That's not really a thing that's in our field. Yeah, the good ones.
Category didn't even exist when I came out of law school.
Yeah, so that was, I knew so much about the company, and I took a month off between because I wanted to study for the test. So I read all bunch of management books. I read subject matter specific books on areas that I felt like I would be deviating from in my day-to-day practice that weren't in my bailiwick, and I felt like I was so prepared. You couldn't have been more prepared coming in from a firm to in-house. I was so not prepared. It was a very cold shower experience, and it was totally different. On day one, my inbox was flooded. I actually think because I knew so much about the company, there was an expectation that I knew so much about the company that I didn't need an onboarding. I didn't need a product demo. I didn't need any of this. And I think that actually backfired on me a little bit.
Sure.
Is there was this expectation that I already had all the answers. But I think one of the big shocks to the system is that when you're at a firm, particularly at Gunderson, if you come across a situation, you can send out emails to everybody and say, has anybody seen this? And there is somebody who has seen that exact situation, your same fact pattern, and can have very practical advice. So you don't have to go reinvent the wheel. When you are in-house, you are routinely seeing things for the first time, especially during that transition phase. So that first year was really tough because I saw a lot of new things for the first time. And it doesn't mean I couldn't handle them or I was bad at them, but certainly it was a lot of firsts for a while. And I would call Mike, I would call other counsels who maybe are specialized in different areas, but more often than not, I'd phone a friend. And so what I did in those early days is I attended a ton of webinars because I didn't know when that subject matter would come up, but I wanted to at least have a working vocabulary. So I attended a ton of subject matter webinars. I made a ton of connections of people I could call and say, I don't know what to do, or has anybody seen this? Do you have an example of this? Do you have recommendations? And so that was really helpful. The other thing that was incredibly hard was the business vocabulary. Every company has their own terms of art, their own tricks that they made up, and understanding what they're talking about in those early days was a challenge. And people would be having conversations on calls I was on, and I would just be Googling words. What does this mean? What does that mean? Thankfully, I don't have to Google that much anymore, but those early days were real tough around like, what does this mean? Why, how are we calculating that? Especially in the security world. I now own security, but during, I think, my first month on the job, we had a security incident and everything was fine. It ended up being okay, no data leaks, no PII, no customer information got out there. But I was in our escalation plan. So somewhere in the chain of command, I needed to make a decision. I had never dealt with that before. That was not in an area of expertise that we necessarily had at Gunderson. And I was like, holy crap, what do I do? What do you do in the event of a security incident? What's an incident response plan? I was looking for ours. And it was a very stressful period of time because it was the first month on the job. I barely understood the business. And here I was handling what could have been a major security incident. Ended up being fine. We have great technical security at Seismic, but it's a very eye-opening experience.
And I think it's important to note, like heading security at Seismic, not like heading security at like a small little company. They have Fortune 500, top banks. I mean, the amount of regulated industries you're dealing with, the amount of sensitive information that you guys come into possession of or could come into possession of. I mean, it is meaningful. So
yeah.
Certainly high stakes.
Yeah. And now, I'm not technical security. I am not a CISO, but I'm a pretty good people manager and I'm a pretty good strategy person. And so, and I'm really good in a crisis. And so those are all things that allow me to work with our very, very savvy technical security folks, if and when something does come.
Okay. I'm gonna skip ahead because you mentioned the magic word talent. I want to talk about like how you guys go about identifying, attracting, retaining top talent, right? And I'd be really interested in understanding, the differences between what that looks like in-house and what that looks like at a law firm.
Yeah.
well, at a law firm, the first thing I do is I try to, make great relationships with recruiters. I'm not saying that to be self-serving, but folks who understand like why Gunderson is maybe different than most big laws send us candidates that they kind of do a lot of the pre-screening for us.
Sure.
So that helps enormously. Second thing, when we're talking to people, so I'm looking for people who can think quickly on their feet, who have it's very hard to explain, but who have self-confidence, but also know that they know nothing.
Sure.
That's a very hard balance to strike. Somebody who can present themselves in a way that a client will engender trust, but that also feels comfortable saying, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm going to go find it out for you. Celaena, I think, did that.
Yeah,
very
that's
well.
actually
I think I heard her say that many times, and then she would come running over to my office and say, "What do we do?"
I want to be clear. I don't know that was a run so much as a shout across.
Shout across,
Yeah.
across the way. What do we do?
Exactly.
But we joke a lot of times, particularly the junior ranks, of like, we can teach you how to do this job, but I can't teach you how to think. I can't teach you to want to do this job. You've got to have that yourself. And so that kind of inquisitiveness, self-starting, that's what I'm really looking for when I'm interviewing junior lawyers. Now, more senior lawyers, obviously, I'm looking for, tell me about the last M&A you did and how you handled the indemnity piece of it. Tell me about, when, what's your opinion on, let's say, whether or not in an investor rights agreement, common stock acquired outside of a financing should count for a registrable securities definition, which for those who are not venture lawyers goes to basically whether or not investors can get more pro rata by buying up secondary. Like those are some more technical skills I'm going to be looking for at kind of a more senior level. But I mean, quite frankly, we don't hire that many lateral senior folks. It's pretty rare. And I think if you look in the office, the ones we have are people who effectively have returned to Gunderson after being in-house into. So
Yeah, I mean, on the in-house side, pretty similarly, you are going to have to roll with quite a few punches.
Sure.
And so finding somebody who can operate in that gray area, who's curious to learn more, who can lean in, is really important. And there are so many people out there who say, these are the defined the guardrails of my job. I don't want to play outside of this box. I need you to play outside of that box a lot. And so I think being curious, being comfortable, being uncomfortable, like we talked about before, being able to pivot You context switch, we context switch as well, and I think those are skills that are soft skills. Not everybody has.
Fair.
So from someone who's built a legal team in-house, can you walk us through like what that process looks like? You're day one, you're building your team. What's going through your head? How do you think about who do I hire first? How do I construct the team? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, so this is a good question. It's going to be different for every company. And so there are a ton of, if you Google, again, we're all Google lawyers when you go in-house. If you Google what to do when building a legal team, you will hear like your first 100 days in-house. And that's fine. And I'm sure there are some good tips and tricks in there. But the first thing is to listen and learn and observe. Not every company is going to be the same. Different strategies will require different investments, but really understanding the business. Learn the business. And then once you learn the business, you can say, okay, here's where I think we could add value by enhancing this area. So at Seismic, like I said, we sell SaaS, but really what we sell is a contract. So I got to make sure that our money-making machine is well supported and that we have a strong partnership there. So I really focused on that. It wasn't great when I joined. It was sort of legal are the deal people who push paper in the corner. That's completely changed. I have a great relationship with our CRO. He sings our praises all the time. And that is because we really said, okay, this is how Seismic makes money. Let's go work with them. And same thing on the product side. We have an incredible R&D organization. If I don't work with product, I'm not doing my job right. So for me, it was identifying where can I make sure I'm adding the most value. We work in a world of limited resources. Everybody does. And so I wanted to make sure my resources were allocated properly. So I made some changes in the commercial area, really enhancing, but my first hire was actually somebody in privacy. As Mike noted, we have Fortune 500 companies who are global, who have concerns about how personal information is being transferred. We also have operations in Europe. And so privacy was a conversation I was having 7 days a week.
Yeah.
It was all consuming. I was talking privacy all the time, and you really can talk privacy all the time. There's so much there, and customers really want to lean in. And I want to make sure I'm bringing value to my customers, and that I'm listening to them, and I'm hearing them out, and that I'm working with them to address their needs or enhance the product. Privacy by design is really important. So I actually went out and I hired somebody from EY, non-attorney, but I needed somebody who could talk to customers, who could lean in, and who could really run a privacy program as opposed to like, well, the law says.
Yeah.
And that was a great hire. He loves his job. He loves being at Seismic, and we work really well together. And I'm very happy about that. And over time, he has helped transform the organization's privacy muscle. We were pretty good at it before. And I actually just was talking to him yesterday, hey, like, where do we rank on the best in class? We have these conversations a lot of, okay, let's take a step back from the day-to-day tactical. Best in class, where are we at? And he said, I do think in a lot of ways we're best in class, and that is huge.
Cool. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of like the line between what can be handled in-house, right? And when it makes sense to leverage outside counsel, right? So I think there's probably an opportunity for both of you to, chime in here. What does that line look like, especially as an organization grows, does it shift? And then, the other question is also like, at what point does hiring in-house legal make sense? Like, at what stage in a company's life cycle should you have a general counsel?
Yeah. I think it really depends on the stage of the company. You might have a company that doesn't have a GC at all. You're going to use outside counsel a lot. You're going to have my cell phone number, and you're going to text him at all hours.
And I can warn you that texting me is really hard for me to follow. So while I'm totally fine with it, not if I don't respond, I apologize.
Yeah, unread. It's very frustrating. But so early stage, you're going to be using outside counsel a lot. And then as you grow, you're going to do a couple of things. You're going to bring people in-house. You're going to get good at knowing what you don't know and want to go to outside counsel. I think a lot of times early stage, you're just going to outside counsel because you don't even know what you don't know. Whereas at least as the company grows and as you get a little bit more resources and knowledge, you understand this is one of those areas that I should consult an expert instead of Google or past experiences. So I think it varies. But for me, is it something of high impact?
Mhm.
That if I screw it up, it's gonna be really bad.
Yeah.
Is it something that I just don't have an area of expertise in, and that I don't think the trade-off between time to value is going to make sense for me to go get that area of expertise? When I first started, I tried to become an expert in everything, which if you're an expert in everything, you're an expert in nothing. So that's a decision you have to make as well. It's like, is it worth it for me to become really smart at this? Sometimes the answer is yes.
Mhm.
Like HR matters.
Yeah.
I gotta be pretty good at that. I'm not a labor attorney by background, but I gotta be pretty good at that.
Yeah.
The patent filings, probably not. I can go get somebody who is very, very technically savvy on that to help us.
Sure.
I think kind of what you want is, not necessarily an inch wide, mile deep, a mile wide, inch deep, but you want to kind of think about it more of like, it's the ocean, right?
Yep.
You want to be the ocean floor. Over here, patent filings, you don't necessarily really need to know about that, but HR, you're gonna be the Mariana Trench on that
Yep.
one, right?
Yeah.
So, and I would say, like, from the outside, I think it depends on what the business is doing. If you're a regulated business,
Mhm.
you're probably bringing in outside
Yep.
counsel way earlier. I mean, I have one client, they brought in in-house counsel before they even closed their financing, because they were like, we know absolutely this is gonna be critical to the business, it's a financially regulated company. And they were like, we have to have this expertise in-house day one.
But I would be willing to bet that in-house counsel probably uses outside counsel just as much as I do, because
Yes.
it's so specialized.
Yes, I would say that's probably right. On the other hand, I have companies I have a client that's Series D and later, and they have never had in-house legal. And quite frankly, I don't think they really need it. They have a very straightforward apparel business, and kind of it's not the sort of thing that they're running into regulated issues on a daily basis. And, they've kind of got a good HR team and they can handle it through non-legal functions. So I would say though, on average, like usually like Series B, Series C is when it begins to get to the point where they're like, hey, look, it's not necessarily a cost savings measure, but it's more of like I need the availability. I need that uptime. And I need it on demand. And so, I'm going to go out and effectively pay a $300,000 or $400,000 retainer to go bring someone here to be here when I need them.
Mhm.
And I can just kind of run into their office and say, you need to think about this for the next 4 hours. And, that will be what it is. I do warn clients that, don't think about in-house legal as I'm now going to save money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think about in-house legal as I'm now just leveling up, right?
Yep.
I'm going to get better at all these things. And I'm going to be reducing risk in areas that I didn't even realize I was taking risk on.
Yeah, and I'll share a story. I talked to somebody a couple of weeks ago whose first time GC joined her company, and she shared with me that she was brought in to reduce outside counsel spend, and that she has a budget of $25K. Yeah.
That's fun.
So for anybody who's listening and is going, wait, is $25K not a lot? $25K probably doesn't cover your HR matters.
Yeah.
$25K isn't going to get you very far. And that's not, yes, lawyers are expensive, but also a GC is going to come in and is going to see all of the issues. Sometimes you're too busy to turn the rock and see what's underneath. And those are, so you got to make that trade-off. But we start to see the issues, and there are for sure risk reward analyses on everything we tackle. But for me, being able to come in and say, this is how I'm going to grow the business, this is what it looks like, this is where we're heading, and these are the resources that need to take me there, that's really important. And so if you are bringing in a GC to cut costs, maybe that's part of it, but what are you doing? What do you got going on? I think it's, what are you solving for?
Yeah.
Do you want to up level of all of the different pockets of risk and pitfalls across the business? Do you need another strategic partner to sit in the foxhole with you? Is the finance team and the HR team just saying, we're doing way too much of this work and working with outside counsel, we need to bring in another body to manage that? Are there key functions that could really benefit from a partner?
Mhm.
Not a service, but a partner in these areas? And I think that's what companies, as they're thinking about bringing in this role, should think about. The other concept here is you don't need to start with a GC.
Mhm.
GCs are expensive. We're expensive not because we like making a lot of money, but because of the budget that we are going to want to fix all of the things, or I shouldn't say fix, enhance,
Sure.
adapt the business, grow the business. So you might not need to start with the executive GC that Daversa is probably talking to. You might need to start with a contracts attorney.
Yeah.
You might need to start with a labor attorney. You might need to start with somebody who does regulatory filings, and that's it. There's a lot of creativity you can have when you're thinking about how to build out your team.
Yeah, Mike, I mean, one of the things we've talked a lot about is how do you avoid accruing legal debt, right? And
Yeah.
you probably don't need to throw a bazooka, you don't need to necessarily hire a general counsel, but figure out, where you need to have specialists in-house so that as you grow, you aren't, also increasing the number of issues that ultimately need to get dealt with.
Yeah, I think legal debt is really important. That to me is fit. There is a specialist fit on that, but the long-term sustainability,
Mhm.
I think, is important, and that's an opportunity to bring in a GC. It is really hard to turn the ship,
Mhm.
particularly at a late stage company. So let's talk commercial contracting, sales cycles, those are the bread and butter of a lot of SaaS companies. If you bring in somebody who's smart at that and who can think about not just what's the contract say, but the operations of how to run that and what a good workflow looks like and like what a good deal desk looks like. If you bring that person in pretty early, which can be an incredible GC, you might have not only prevented a lot of buildup of legal debt, but like operational debt. And so I think there are some good reasons why you should bring in that GC early, but don't bring in that GC and expect them to have fun redlining contracts in the corner.
Sure.
You're probably going to get really bored. So I think what are you trying to solve for?
Okay, just because I want to make sure to put an exclamation point on this, like you talked about kind of operational debt. And our, whole thesis is that like great GCs are great operators. So my question was initially like, what do you think the biggest value of a good, GC is to an organization, right? But I would love it if you could kind of answer that question, specifically as it relates to the whole company's operations.
Yeah, so I work with every business leader.
Sure.
And for me to be a good GC, I need to know where they came from and where they want to go and the trade-offs that they've made. And once I understand that, I can partner with them really well.
Mhm.
And so I think there is a huge value to bringing in a GC who is another 360-degree view, who is deep in the operations of every function, who is helping them achieve their goals, who can be a consigliere to the CEO, and who can also be that person that you go, oh my gosh, something crazy just happened, and they jump in. And so I think there is incredible strategic value to bringing in that executive GC. Lawyers are people who just are problem solvers by nature.
Mhm.
We especially coming from the world we came from, did a lot of creative problem solving,
Sure.
which tends to be what we see as a need a lot in these companies. And so GCs aren't lawyers, they're business people with law degrees and who bring in unique perspective. And I would really encourage everyone, when you're thinking about the value of the GC, we get really bored if you push us into the corner. Bring us to the table, let us help you, let us grow with you. We are, at least for me, I am humble enough to know I don't have the answer to everything, but I'm smart or skeptical enough to ask questions of people when they jump to conclusions. Maybe it's the aggressive lawyer in me that is that way, but I think that adds a pretty unique spin on a lot of things.
One of the things that we've noticed, right, because, I recruit for more functions than just legal, right, is that, GCs tend to bring kind of a complementary perspective to the rest of the senior leadership team. And I've personally witnessed, the benefit of that inside of rapidly growing companies. Okay, I think we're going to turn it over to questions from anybody who's watching pretty soon. But before we, do that, I wanted to ask you guys if you had any questions for us, because we've just been peppering you for the last 45 minutes.
How's the market look?
Great question. So I would say, overall, actually sentiment's pretty positive, right? We're obviously kind of in unprecedented times. The last, 72, 96 hours, like really kind of, proving that point. But, I think there are still great companies being built. I think that the way that entrepreneurs are being forced to kind of manage their business is definitely evolving, right? Less availability of capital, right? A push from probably every board, every investor to, find cash flow positivity, if not straight up profitability, right? There are industries that are doing really well. There are industries that are having, a much more difficult time. But look, we all work in tech, we all work in venture-backed tech, like the constant is growth, right? So with that, I mean, look, our GC practice was kind of born out of just demand, right? It wasn't something that, either of us woke up one day and said, let's go do this. We just kept fielding requests by companies that we were working with to do their general counsel searches. And, at first it was definitely companies in regulated industries, right? I mean, that probably, it correlates to where a lot of our work is, fintech, digital health, stuff like that. But, now we're seeing it spread. So I think, this is all kind of anecdotal, right? But there's way more kind of GC work now than there was a couple of years ago. And I think it looks a lot like, the arc looks a lot like finance, looks a lot like people. I mean, I've been with Daversa for 13 years, right? I saw our finance practice kind of come into existence out of nothing, right? I saw our people practice come into existence out of nothing. Those are two of our kind of most in-demand functions right now. And, the same thing is happening with GCs. I also think that, to your point, like GCs are being brought into the room, right? And, as a result, they come across as much more strategic, helpful, multifaceted partners, right? Than, historically when you were put in a corner, right? But the market's great. I mean, there's great availability of talent. That's true for GC. That's true for all functions. And candidly, I think the last 96 hours probably highlight the need for great legal leadership as well. So market is strong, and this function in particular is growing at a noticeable clip.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what's the profile or the profiles for the most common searches that you're seeing? Is it 20 years of experience, or is it 4 years of experience?
Probably in the middle, not to take the easy route, but I think it's the quality of the experience too, right? Like, not all law firms are created equal. And I think that if you can find somebody who cut their teeth at like a top tier firm, that's really where you learn to become a great lawyer, right? I think, what comes after that, I guess to answer the question, maybe a little bit less relevant, or the things that an executive picks up, the skills an executive picks up after their, big law experience, I would more often than not, I think gets filed into the nice to have category, right? So I think it's really important that you learn to become a great lawyer, right? And this is not to kind of, I'm not trying to say that any path is not like viable, right? But I think probably the best thing that you can do, and we've got evidence right here, is work for somebody like Mike, right? Like work at a top tier law firm. Work at a top tier law firm, learn the law, learn how to be a great lawyer, right? And then you want people that are proven in their ability to operate in an early stage environment, right? You want people that have all the kind of natural traits that we talked about. They're inquisitive, they're self-starters, they love solving problems, things like that. So I guess to answer the question concretely, like 4 years of experience feels a little bit light, but 20 is by no means necessary. And we have seen folks, like I'm in my head going through some of the last placements that we've made, hire the up and comer, honestly. So
I think that's, you are going to get great return on your investment. I think people who are up and coming are hungry and they want to prove themselves, as opposed to the sort of, I've been here, I've done this before. That's not my job. Right?
Yeah. Cool. All right. So I think maybe we should see if there's any questions.
Yeah, we have a couple that have come in. The first one being for Mike, which is, how should a company evaluate a law firm when bringing on counsel for the first time and not having worked with one before?
That's a really good question. So I think there are a couple ways you can do this. One is that there are league tables that are out there that show kind of perceptions by other lawyers. Chambers publishes one, Legal 500 publishes one. Your industry also may compile league tables. For us, it's PitchBook, kind of shows like who's most active. That'll kind of give you like the range of like the top tier players. Now, it also may show you some of the other players in the space if you're budget constrained, but I would kind of start there and then ask your network, like, hey, do you know somebody? Do you know anybody at these firms? Have you worked with these people before? Kind of see what they say. Interview different lawyers. Lawyers are going to have different styles. More importantly, don't just talk to the partners, talk to the associates on the team, because the reality is that, like, I'm really busy and I love talking to my clients as much as I can, but like, there's only so many hours in the day. And, you know, if I can't squeeze you in right at that second, like, go to the associate. So having a good working relationship with the associate as well is really critical. And then I think also, like, there's a little bit that you might want to think about kind of overall firm profile and style. Like, some firms are more focused and specialized, like our firm. Some firms are much broader and they have kind of everything under one roof. There are really big pros and cons to that. And, you know, you should feel free to ask the lawyer you're interviewing, like, hey, what do you do? How would you take, like, how would you handle a litigation matter? Or how do you deal with patent filings? And see what their response is. If their response is, well, I got some guy down the hall and I don't know if he's any good, but I get paid if you use him. That's a very different response than me, which is, I'm like, we don't do that because we don't think it's core to our business. So we send it to the best people outside that we think are going to do the absolute best job on it.
Great, thank you. We have another one coming in for Celaena. So what are the top ways that hiring a company's first GC pays for itself, and what tends to be the first few items that this GC will come in and either transform or change?
Ooh, that's a good question. So first year when I was there, we did a triple threat, debt, equity, and M&A all at once. Seismic likes to take hard things and then figure out a way to make them harder on me every year. Well, the bill paid for itself. I managed to recover my entire salary on that deal. But jokes aside.
For the record, was Gunderson Counsel?
No.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that's probably why.
Yeah, I was able to do it myself. I didn't do it all myself, but jokes aside, I think about it from a building blocks perspective. Ask that GC what they're going to do in that first year, where they would look for savings, not just on the legal bill side, because again, you're not necessarily going to get a 1-for-1. This is my salary, therefore this is how many dollars we're going to save, but the opportunities to add value in other areas. So a lot of times, if you don't have a GC, your CFO or your VP of finance is playing GC. That is a ton of stress and angst on that person. And so if you have given them the mandate to get this person to take the company public, or let's start doing our first audit or something of that level of complexity, to then also throw the GC work on them is really challenging. And so I'd also think about how much work you're freeing up for other people and how much bandwidth you're going to get off of them. And then the last is that sort of legal and operational debt. Can you make investments now such that over the long term, you have a better foundation for the company's growth? We talk about venture as hyper growth. We are constantly growing. If you don't make that investments up front, it can be incredibly expensive later on to undo some of those mistakes, or maybe not mistakes, but just pivot in a way that makes more sense for your business. And so bringing in the GC who can add that different level of perspective or add that different insight, either from their past experience or ideas from having worked with all of the different levels of the business, I think you're going to get great return.
Mm-hmm. Awesome answer. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more. I have a 3-part question that got submitted. So Alex and Britt, this one's coming your way. So first part is, what is there a particular industry as recruiters that you are seeing that are hiring more in-house counsel than others? And then the second part of the question is, where do you tend to recruit candidates from, and is it hard to convince counsel to go in-house?
I'll take the first part. I'll take the second.
I think where we've seen a lot of demand is in the highly regulated industries. We've done a lot of work in fintech and pre-IPO businesses. So bringing the legal function in-house that historically has, outsourced all of their legal work. So come in-house and build the function from scratch to get the company ready to go public. And then companies that are earlier stage that are in that highly regulated category that are going to need need that person earlier on in their life cycle, like we kind of touched on earlier.
And then as far as like, where do we recruit? And is it difficult? It's incredibly difficult, and that's why we're so good at what we do. No, but where do we recruit? I think, great people run in packs. There's an example right here. So I think it's about, we've invested deeply in relationships in the legal field, right? And that allows us to, make calls and ask for referrals when we're kicking off searches, right? And I would say if there's a pattern, it's kind of organizations where people have spent time, right? Like, you talk a lot about the PayPal mafia, and you look at kind of, what the companies that grew out of that, founding team. I don't really want to name names, but there are definitely companies where, we see a lot of great people kind of emerge from, right? And usually it was because of something specific, like the company was on the bleeding edge of, some regulatory kind of environment, right? So it's about kind of identifying those patterns and then leveraging, relationships to get in touch with the right people. The same is true with law firms, to my earlier point, right? Like, I don't think that all law firms were created equal. And there are patterns that you see in the backgrounds of great lawyers. And it's definitely got to do with kind of where they cut their teeth, who they learn from, stuff like that. And then is it difficult? Like Celaena mentioned earlier, her kind of mindset around choosing, a different path from the partner path in big law. And our experience has been that, most senior candidates have a sense of kind of the direction they want to take their career, right? And if somebody is hardcore committed to making partner, they're probably going to go and do that, right? So yes, it would be difficult, but it also kind of disqualifies that person for, an in-house role. Whereas, somebody might be fascinated by the ability to kind of, work across functions and dig into the rest of the business. And, they're looking to go in-house. So some of the friction is kind of eased by a candidate's own motivations, right? And then it's on us to find the right person for the job.
Great, thank you. I think that's all the time we have today.
So I just wanted to thank you guys. I thought this was a ton of fun, but I appreciate all the insights. I think the audience probably does as well. I was really happy with those questions. So I think that this was great. And yeah, thank you for the partnership with our firm.
Yeah, of course, glad to be here. Hopefully we gave good advice.
All right, everybody, take care.
Thanks, everyone.